My sister Michelle was holding her champagne glass high, her new husband Derek beaming beside her as 200 guests waited for her toast. She looked absolutely radiant in her $10,000 designer dress, every detail of this lavish wedding perfect, every expense spared nothing. But when my father leaned over and whispered those 4 words in my ear, "Don't drink that," I knew our family's darkest secret was about to explode in the most public way possible. 2 minutes later, Derek was on his knees, clutching his throat, and Michelle was screaming at the top of her lungs as chaos erupted around us. I'm telling you this story because 3 months have passed since that wedding, and I'm finally ready to talk about what really happened that day. About why my father knew. About the choice I made. And about how everything Michelle thought she knew about our family was about to crumble in front of everyone she'd ever tried to impress. Let me start from the beginning, because to understand what happened at that wedding, you need to understand who Michelle and I really are and who we became. Growing up, Michelle and I were as close as 2 sisters could be. We shared everything: clothes, secrets, dreams about the future. I was 2 years older, but Michelle was always the one with the grand plans. Even as kids, she'd talk about the big house she'd live in someday, the important people she'd marry, the life of luxury that was waiting for her. I used to think it was cute, this little girl with such big dreams. Our parents ran a small family restaurant. Nothing fancy, just good, honest food that kept the bills paid and put us through school. Dad worked 16-hour days, and Mom handled the books and took care of us girls. We weren't rich, but we were happy. At least I thought we were. Everything changed when Michelle went to college. She got into this prestigious business program, and suddenly, our little family restaurant wasn't good enough anymore. She'd come home for holidays talking about her roommate's father who owned a chain of hotels, or her study group partner whose family had a house in the Hamptons. She started looking at our modest home differently, speaking to our parents with this new tone of embarrassment. I stayed local, went to community college, and helped Dad with the restaurant. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved the work. I loved seeing regular customers smile when their favorite dish came out exactly how they remembered. I loved the way Dad's face lit up when someone complimented the sauce recipe he perfected over 20 years. It was honest work, and it meant something. But Michelle saw it differently. She saw it as something to escape from. When she graduated, she landed a job at this high-end marketing firm in the city. Suddenly, she was wearing expensive suits and talking about networking and building her brand. She'd visit maybe once a month, always checking her phone, always having somewhere more important to be. The gap between us was growing, but I kept hoping we'd find our way back to each other. Then she met Derek Wellington, and yes, he made sure everyone knew his last name came with money. Old money. His family owned a string of luxury hotels, and Derek worked in acquisitions, which seemed to mean he traveled around buying up smaller businesses and, well, let's just say not everyone was happy about those acquisitions afterward. The first time Michelle brought him home, I knew we were in trouble. Not because Derek was a bad guy, though he certainly wasn't good, but because of how Michelle transformed around him. She laughed differently, spoke differently, even held herself differently. She kept apologizing for our house, our neighborhood, our parents' accents. It was painful to watch. Derek, for his part, played the charming boyfriend perfectly. He complimented Mom's cooking, asked Dad about the restaurant business, and told stories about his travels that made Michelle hang on his every word. But I caught something in his eyes when he looked around our modest living room, something that made my skin crawl. It was the same look Michelle had started giving our home, like he was calculating its worth and finding it lacking. 6 months later, they were engaged. The engagement party was my first real glimpse into the world Michelle was so desperate to join. It was held at Derek's family's country club, all marble and crystal, and people who'd never worked a day in their lives but somehow had opinions about work ethic. Michelle floated through that party like she'd been born to it, introducing our parents as the family restaurateurs in a tone that made it sound quaint rather than honest. I watched Dad that night, saw how he stood a little straighter when people asked about the restaurant, how he tried to match their casual confidence when talking about the business. Mom spent the whole evening worried about using the wrong fork. And Michelle pretended not to notice their discomfort. That's when I knew we'd lost her. The wedding planning was intense. Michelle had spreadsheets for her spreadsheets. Every detail had to be perfect. Every element had to reflect the vision she and Derek had discussed. The venue alone cost more than our parents made in 2 years, but somehow Derek's family was graciously covering most expenses. Michelle made sure everyone knew this, framing it as generosity rather than what it really was, a way to ensure the wedding met their standards, not ours. 3 weeks before the wedding, something changed in Dad. He'd been working extra shifts to help pay for what we could contribute, never complaining, never making Michelle feel guilty about the enormous cost. But suddenly he seemed distant, worried. He'd sit at the kitchen table after closing the restaurant, staring at papers I couldn't quite see, his brow furrowed in concentration. When I asked him about it, he'd just smile and change the subject. But I knew something was wrong. 2 weeks before the wedding, Derek came by the house alone. Michelle was in the city picking up her dress, and Derek said he wanted to discuss some business with Dad. They talked for over an hour in Dad's small office behind the restaurant, and when Derek left, he had the satisfied smile that made my stomach turn. Dad wouldn't tell me what they discussed, but that night I heard him on the phone with his lawyer. I only caught fragments. Acquisition offer, family business, need time to think. The pieces started clicking together in the worst possible way. 1 week before the wedding, I confronted Dad directly. He was in the restaurant after hours, sitting alone in the dark, just thinking. "Dad, what did Derek want?" I asked. He looked up at me with eyes that seemed 10 years older than they had a month ago. "He made an offer on the restaurant," he said quietly. "A very generous offer. And he made it clear that it would mean a lot to Michelle if we accepted, that it would help them start their new life without complications." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Complications. Dad sighed. He thinks the restaurant is beneath Michelle now, that having family in the service industry might hurt her chances in his social circles. He offered enough money for your mother and me to retire comfortably, maybe buy a little condo in Florida. What did you tell him? I told him I needed time to think. But I could see in his face that he was already leaning toward accepting. Not because he wanted to sell, but because he loved Michelle and thought this was what she needed to be happy. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I started digging into Derek's business practices. It wasn't hard. There were articles online, court records, testimonies from other small business owners who'd sold to Derek's company. The pattern was always the same: a generous offer, followed by immediate closure and conversion to something more profitable. The original owners were pushed out, the employees were fired, and the community lost another piece of its identity. But there was something else, something that made my blood run cold. Derek's company had been under investigation by the state attorney general for fraud, specifically for using front companies to hide the true nature of their acquisitions. They'd been bribing local officials, falsifying environmental reports, and in some cases, straight up stealing family businesses through legal technicalities. The investigation had been ongoing for 2 years, and Derek was named as a primary target. I printed everything I could find and took it to Dad. When he saw the evidence, when he realized what kind of man his daughter was about to marry, something in his face just broke. "She doesn't know, does she?" he asked quietly. "I don't think so. I think she just sees the money and the status." Dad stared at the papers for a long time. Then he looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, determined but sad. "We're going to the wedding," he said. "We're going to smile and support Michelle because she's our daughter and we love her. But Derek," he tapped the stack of papers, "Derek's going to get exactly what he deserves." I should have asked what he meant. I should have pushed for details. But part of me didn't want to know. Part of me trusted that whatever Dad was planning, it was the right thing to do. The morning of the wedding, Dad was different, calm in a way that seemed almost eerie. He helped Mom get ready, complimented her dress, made jokes to ease her nerves. But when we got in the car to drive to the venue, he handed me a small envelope. "If something happens to me today," he said, "make sure Michelle gets this. But only after she sees who Derek really is." My hands shook as I took the envelope. "Dad, what are you planning?" He smiled, and for a moment he looked like the father who used to flip pancakes for Michelle and me on Sunday mornings. "I'm planning to give my daughter the wedding she deserves. One where she learns the truth before it's too late." The wedding venue was everything Michelle had dreamed of, a sprawling estate with manicured gardens and a ballroom that could have hosted royalty. Guests in designer clothes mingled on the terrace, sipping champagne that cost more per bottle than most people make in a day. Michelle looked absolutely radiant, and Derek looked every inch the perfect groom. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were all actors in a play, and only Dad knew how it was supposed to end. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Michelle walked down the aisle on Dad's arm, glowing with happiness, and for a moment I almost forgot about everything else. This was my sister's wedding day. Whatever happened next, I wanted her to have this moment of pure joy. After the ceremony, as guests moved to the cocktail hour, I noticed Dad talking quietly with several people I didn't recognize. They looked official, serious men in understated suits who kept checking their phones. When I caught Dad's eye, he just nodded and mouthed, "Soon." The reception began with all the elegance Michelle had planned. The band was perfect, the food was exquisite, and Derek's family held court like the royalty they imagined themselves to be. Derek's father gave a toast about welcoming Michelle to the family that managed to sound both gracious and condescending at the same time. Then came the champagne toast. Servers moved through the crowd with silver trays, distributing crystal glasses filled with what Derek had insisted was the finest champagne money could buy. Michelle and Derek stood at the head table, waiting for everyone to be served before making their toast to begin married life together. That's when Dad leaned over to me and whispered those 4 words, "Don't drink that." My blood turned to ice. "Dad, what?" But before I could finish the question, Derek was standing, raising his glass with a smile that belonged on magazine covers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "thank you all for sharing this incredible day with Michelle and me." I watched Dad's face. He was staring at Derek with an intensity that made me afraid to breathe. "I want to take this moment," Derek continued, "to thank my beautiful bride for bringing such authenticity to my life, for showing me that love can bridge any gap, whether social or economic." I saw Michelle's smile falter slightly at the word economic, but Derek pressed on. "And I want to thank her family for their contribution to the celebration. I know it wasn't easy for them to—" He paused, as if searching for the right diplomatic word. "To stretch beyond their usual means for this occasion." The insult was wrapped in silk, but it was still an insult. I saw Mom's face flush with embarrassment, saw Dad's jaw clench. But Michelle just stood there, champagne glass raised, either not catching the insult or choosing to ignore it. "So let's raise our glasses," Derek said. "To new beginnings, to leaving the past behind, and to the beautiful future that Michelle and I will build together." 200 crystal glasses rose into the air. That's when Derek took his first sip, and that's when everything went to hell. Derek's face went pale, then green, then white as paper. The champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor. He clutched his throat, making choking sounds that cut through the elegant music like a knife. "Derek!" Michelle screamed, rushing to his side as he collapsed to his knees. "Someone call an ambulance." But Derek wasn't done. As he gasped for air, he managed to point a shaking finger at our table and wheeze out words that made my blood run cold. "Poison, they poisoned." The ballroom erupted in chaos. Guests screamed, some dropping their own champagne glasses in terror. Security rushed toward our table as Derek writhed on the floor, and I realized with horror that everyone was staring at Dad. But Dad just sat there, calm as a lake in summer, watching Derek with the same expression he'd worn when putting down a rabid dog that had wandered onto our property years ago, sad but necessary. "Dad," I whispered urgently, "what did you do?" He turned to me with eyes that held no regret. "What I should have done months ago," he said quietly. "I protected my daughter." That's when the men in understated suits I'd seen Dad talking to earlier stepped forward, and I realized they weren't wedding guests at all. "Derek Wellington," one of them announced, flashing a badge. "You're under arrest for fraud, extortion, and racketeering." The chaos in the ballroom shifted from panic to confusion. Derek, still gasping but clearly not dying, was being helped to his feet by paramedics who seemed remarkably calm for people dealing with a poisoning victim. "I don't understand," Michelle said, her voice breaking. "What's happening?" That's when Dad stood up and walked over to her. In his hand was a small vial that I recognized from our restaurant. It was ipecac syrup, something we kept in the first aid kit to induce vomiting in case of accidental poisoning. Harmless, but effective. "Michelle," Dad said gently, "there's something you need to know about your husband." One of the federal agents stepped forward with a briefcase full of documents. "Mrs. Wellington, your husband has been under investigation for federal crimes for the past 2 years. We've been building a case against him and his associates for fraud, money laundering, and destruction of family businesses through illegal practices." Michelle looked back and forth between the agent and Derek, who was now sitting in a chair, no longer choking but looking like he wanted to disappear. "That's impossible," she said. "Derek runs a legitimate business. He helps families by buying their businesses when they're struggling." "Ma'am," the agent said gently, "your husband's company has destroyed over 40 family businesses in the past 5 years. They use fraud and intimidation to force sales, then immediately close the businesses and sell the properties to developers. The families lose everything, and the communities lose pieces of their heritage." Dad pulled out the envelope he'd given me earlier and handed it to Michelle. "Including ours, sweetheart. Derek offered to buy our restaurant not to help us retire, but to shut us down and turn the property into a parking lot for his family's new hotel." Michelle's hands shook as she opened the envelope and began reading. I could see her face changing as she absorbed the truth, the court documents, the testimonies from other families Derek had destroyed, the evidence of bribery and fraud that painted a picture of the man she just married. "This can't be true," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Derek, finally able to speak clearly, tried one last play. "Michelle, baby, you have to understand, this is all a misunderstanding. Your father is just upset because he doesn't want to modernize, and these investigators are." "Shut up," Michelle said quietly. Everyone in the ballroom fell silent. Michelle looked up from the papers, and I saw something in her face that reminded me of the sister I'd grown up with, the one who'd fight anyone who tried to hurt our family. "You were going to destroy our family's restaurant," she said to Derek. "You were going to put our parents out of business and pretend it was a favor. Michelle, it's not like that. And all those other families," she continued, her voice getting stronger. "All those businesses you told me about buying and improving, you destroyed them. You destroyed families just like ours." Derek's mask finally slipped completely. "Those people were holding back progress," he snapped. "Small businesses like your father's are inefficient, outdated. The market was going to eliminate them eventually anyway. I just accelerated the process and made everyone money in the process." The silence that followed was deafening. Michelle looked at Derek for a long moment, then slowly removed her wedding ring and dropped it on the floor next to his broken champagne glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to the stunned crowd, "I'm very sorry you had to witness this, but I want to make something clear. As of this moment, I am no longer Mrs. Wellington. I am Michelle Rodriguez, daughter of Maria and Carlos Rodriguez, who own the best damn family restaurant in 3 counties. And I am not ashamed of that. I am proud of that." She turned to our parents, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, Dad, I am so sorry. I got lost trying to be someone I'm not, and I almost let this man destroy everything you built. Can you ever forgive me?" Dad didn't say a word. He just opened his arms, and Michelle ran into them like she was 8 years old again. As the federal agents led Derek away in handcuffs and the wedding guests stood around in shock, our family held each other in the middle of that marble ballroom. And for the first time in years, we were complete again. The aftermath was complicated. The marriage was annulled within a week, since it turned out Derek had lied about several fundamental things, including his financial situation. Most of his wealth was tied up in properties that were about to be seized by the federal government. Michelle moved back home for a while, helping at the restaurant and rediscovering who she really was without Derek's influence. She kept the wedding dress as a reminder, she said, of how close she'd come to losing herself completely. Dad never apologized for what he did that day, and honestly, I never expected him to. He'd seen his daughter about to make the biggest mistake of her life, and he'd found a way to save her that also brought a criminal to justice. The investigation had been stalled for months until Dad contacted them with inside information about Derek's planned acquisition of our restaurant, information that gave them the evidence they needed to finally make their move. 3 months later, Michelle met someone new, a teacher named James, who came to the restaurant every Friday for Dad's special fish tacos and who asked Michelle out by complimenting her parents' recipe before he even mentioned her smile. They've been together 8 months now, and I've never seen my sister happier. The restaurant is doing better than ever. Turns out, Having your family business featured in a federal fraud investigation as the kind of authentic establishment these criminals target is actually pretty good for business. We've been written up in food magazines as a symbol of family values and community heritage. And Derek got 7 years in federal prison. His family disowned him to protect their own business interests, and most of his assets were seized to compensate his victims. I heard through the grapevine that he's working in the prison kitchen now, which seems like appropriate irony to me. I still have the envelope Dad gave me that day, though Michelle never needed to read it. But I opened it later, just to see what he'd planned to tell her if things had gone differently. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note. Michelle, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and you need to know the truth about Derek. I didn't want to hurt you, but I couldn't let him destroy our family. You are strong, and you are worthy of real love, not the fake kind that comes with conditions and shame. Remember who you are, remember where you come from, and never let anyone make you feel small for loving your family. You are my daughter, and I am proud of you every single day. Love, Dad. Below that, in smaller handwriting, P.S. The champagne wasn't poisoned. I just gave him some ipecac syrup. He'll be fine, but his dignity might take a while to recover. Love, your sneaky old man. That's my dad. Always planning 3 steps ahead, always protecting his family, and always finding a way to get the last word. So that's the story of my sister's wedding, and why my father whispered, "Don't drink that," just before Derek learned that you can't buy integrity, you can't fake family, and you definitely can't outsmart a man who spent 20 years perfecting recipes and twice as long perfecting his protective instincts. Michelle is happy now, really happy, in a way that has nothing to do with money or status and everything to do with being loved for exactly who she is. Mom and Dad are still running the restaurant, still working too many hours, still making the best food in town. And Derek learned that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the quiet one in the corner who's been watching and planning while you're busy talking. Justice served, family style. If you enjoyed the story of family justice and second chances, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories of people who got exactly what they deserved. And remember, never underestimate the quiet ones, because sometimes they're the ones who see everything coming.